Guys, welcome to my YouTube channel Study with Dr. Pranik. Today we will discuss chapter Otolaryngology from the textbook Guide 8th edition. Let's begin with our topic diseases of the ear. In this otitis media, most commonly asked topic in the university exam. So, otitis media is a common early childhood infection. Anatomic features that make young children particularly susceptible to ear infection include shorter and more horizontal compliant tissue tube and bacterial caries in the adenoids. Other risk factors include exposure to cigarette smoke, overcrowding, bottle feeding, cleft palate, Down syndrome, allergy, immune dysfunction. These risk factors contribute to the pathophysiology of two more common varieties of otitis media, acute otitis media and otitis media with effusion. Two variety. Acute otitis media, first one, and otitis media with effusion, second one. So now first, acute otitis media. Acute otitis media in children tend to have bimodal age distribution, with children between age 6 to 24 months and 5 to 6 years at a greater risk. Etiology. The most common organisms causing acute otitis media are Streptococcus pneumoniae and Haemophilus influenzae. Accounting for approximately 65% cases and 15% are caused by Moraxella catarrhalis, Streptococcus pyogenes and Staphylococcus aureus. Strep respiratory virus play an important role in initiating otitis media and may be the only pathogen in some cases, since 20% of middle ear aspirate are sterile. Diagnosis. AOM is characterized by the rapid onset of symptoms which may be local, example otalgia or ear tugging, and or systemic fever or crying. Older children may report impaired hearing. History of recent upper respiratory tract infection is common. Otoscopic examination reveals a red and bulging tympanic membrane with reduced mobility as measured by either tympanometry or insufflation through the otoscope. Mnemonic otoscopy. Rupture of eardrum with ear discharge suppression may have already occurred in such which case of the ear canal contain an opaque yellow, green or reddish brown fluid. Cleaning of this fluid usually reveals an intact drum as the rupture is small and close promptly after spontaneous perforation. The diagnosis of AOM is considered certain if all the following criteria are met. Criteria for diagnosis of acute otitis media is rapid onset, sign of middle ear effusion, sign and symptom of middle ear inflammation. These three criteria, if met, it matches the diagnosis of acute otitis media. Treatment. Antimicrobial therapy is recommended, however, in some cases children may qualify for a trial of observation. Amoxicillin should be the first line therapy of AOM. Higher doses 80 to 90 mg per kg per day may be considered where the streptococcal resistance is endemic agent with beta-lactamase resistance. Use of second line drug. Initial antibiotic therapy should last at least 7 days. Re-examination is indicated after 3 to 4 days and at 3 weeks. Adjuvant treatment with oral and topical decongestant drug is not necessary. Antihistaminic agent which contribute little to a resolution of otitis media and may precipitate sinus infection due to the Their drying effect on mucosal secretion, as are also not recommended. Tympanocentesis aspiration of middle ear fluid is a pint 18 gauge expanded needle on a syringe may provide specimen for culture in a patient with complicated AOM who cannot tolerate tympanostomy tube insertion. Tympanocentesis improves otalgia but does not shorten the course of the illness. Many children present with recurrent episode of AOM. A child that has 4 episodes of AOM in 6 months or 6 episodes in 12 months should be considered for tympanostomy tube insertion. If a child requires a second set of tympanostomy tube, concurrent adenoidectomy is considered. No benefit for concurrent tonsillectomy has been demonstrated in patients with recurrent AOM. Otitis media with effusion. Following an episode of AOM, serous and mucoid middle ear effusion may be seen. Effusions are found to persist in up to 40% of patients 1 month after AOM and in 10% after 3 months. Many children with OME do not have history of previous acute middle ear infection. Most children are asymptomatic and complain of hearing loss and ear fullness. Otalgia is not normally present. Otoscopy reveals a dull tympanic membrane with a middle ear effusion, frequently with air fluid, label or bubbles. Reduced tympanic membrane mobility on either pneumatic otoscopy or type B pattern or tympanometry confirm the diagnosis. Since over 65% of serous middle ear effusion resolve spontaneously within 3 months, newly diagnosed effusion should be observed for this period. Antibiotic administration is not shown to resolve OME. Use of antihistamines, anticonvulsants is not recommended. The benefit of corticosteroid administration has not been proven, but brief trial of steroid is commonly used. If effusion persists beyond 3 months, tympanostomy tube insertion is considered. Beyond 3 months. For any hearing loss more than 25 decibel. Other indications of tube placement in OME are speech delay, altered behavior, mesocecal such as otitic meningitis and impending cholesteatoma. Formation from tympanic membrane retraction, improvement in hearing and ear discomfort is immediate. Mean time before extrusion is usually between 12 to 18 months. Insertion of long-term tube or adenoidectomy may be considered in patients with recurrent or persistent symptomatic effusion. T-tube have been associated with tympanic membrane perforation. Ear plugs are recommended while the tubes are in place to avoid entry of water into the middle ear space. Chronic suppurative otitis media. Ear drainage. Ear drainage that persists for longer than 6 weeks. Is generally due to chronic inflammation of the middle ear space or mastoid ear cell. Chronic suppurative otitis media is invariably present with tympanic membrane perforation which allow otorrhea. CSOM most often result from neglected episodes of AOM and is therefore more common in children with inadequate access of healthcare. It most often occur in first 5 years of life. Estrogen tube dysfunction plays a central role in pathophysiology. Cholesteatoma, a sac of squamous epithelium extending from the tympanic membrane into the middle ear, also present with a chronically draining ear. Most cholesteatoma is acquired. It remains unclear whether a cholesteatoma arises from extension of a tympanic membrane retraction pocket or from aberrant inward migration of normal epithelium. Sorry. Rarely it may be congenital arising de novo through the eustachian tube by passage of neonatal epithelium through the not malignant cholesteatoma may cause serious complications by slow expansion and local destruction. Etiology. Most commonly isolated organism is Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Other organisms include Staphylococcus aureus, Proteus, E. coli, anaerobes. Fungi, especially Aspergillus and Candida, may be important. Diagnosis. Chronic ear discharge is the hallmark of CSO. Otoscopy reveals perforation of the tympanic membrane. A chronically draining ear may also be seen with cholesteatoma, which is a sac of squamous epithelium extending from the tympanic membrane into the middle ear. Most cholesteatoma is acquired, although whether it arises from extension of tympanic membrane, retraction pocket, or from aberrant inward migration of the normal eardrum epithelium remains unclear. Rarely, the cholesteatoma may be congenital, arising de novo in the middle ear space. Though not malignant, cholesteatoma may cause serious complication by slow expansion and local destruction. These complications are discussed further in the next section. Treatment. Medical therapy consists primarily of topical antibiotic and oral therapy. Topical quinolone appear to be effective and safe. Complicated infection and or any sign of systemic involvement require the use of systemic antibiotic therapy. Parents should be instructed to avoid water exposure. Secondary fungal otitis externa is a complication of topical antibiotic treatment. Otolaryngology. Secondary fungal otitis externa. Secondary complication is a complication. Otolaryngology referral is necessary to rule out cholesteatoma. Surgery is usually indicated for cases of CSOM that do not respond to conservative treatment. Surgical therapy involves repair of tympanic membrane perforation, tympanoplasty, with or without mastectomy. If cholesteatoma is suspected, ear exploration by mastectomy and cholesteatoma removal is mandatory. The primary goal of surgical therapy for cholesteatoma is to create a safe ear by removal of all cholesteatoma. Hearing preservation is a secondary goal. Complication. Untreated otitis media may cause serious complications, which are classified as either intracranial or extracranial. Complications of AOM are more common in young children, while complications of CSOM with or without cholesteatoma are more common in older children. The most common complication of CSOM is hearing loss. Which may affect language development and school performance. The hearing loss is usually conductive and result from middle ear edema and fluid and tympanic membrane perforation. Sensorineural hearing loss may rarely occur due to direct extension of inflammatory mediator into the inner ear. Usually conductive hearing loss. Meningitis is the most common intracranial complication of both acute and chronic otitis media. Furthermore, AOM is the most common cause of secondary meningitis. Pneumococcal meningitis is the most common cause of acquired sensorineural hearing loss. The mortality rate from otitic meningitis has decreased significantly in the post-antibiotic era and with the use of streptococcal vaccines. Brain abscess is a potentially lethal complication. Unlike meningitis, which is caused more frequently by AOM, brain abscess result almost exclusively from CS1. Therapy with a broad spectrum parenteral antibiotic is begun immediately and surgical drainage is considered. Thrombosis of the sigmoid or transverse sinus is another important intracranial complication. Patient typically present with headache, malaise, and high spiking fever in a picket fence pattern. Treatment involves parenteral antibiotic and surgical drainage of mastoid. Acute gallstone mastoiditis. This results from the spread of the infection into the mastoid bone, and the entirety should be differentiated from fluid effusion within the mastoid air cell, which is sometimes mistaken reported radiologically as mastoiditis. Such opacification is commonly seen with AOM or OMA. Is readily apparent on CT and is of little clinical significance. Gallstone mastoiditis, on the other hand, present with post-auricular erythema, tenderness, and edema. The auricle is displaced inferiorly and laterally. The CT scan shows fluid and breakdown of the wall separating the mastoid air cell. Untreated gallstone mastoiditis may spread externally, leading to the formation of subperiosteal or deep neck abscess. Acute gallstone mastoiditis should initially be treated with parenteral antibiotic direct against the aforementioned pathogen associated with AOM. If mastoiditis is superimposed on a chronically draining ear, coverage should be added or for gram-negative and anaerobic organ surgeries in the form of cortical mastoidectomy with tympanostomy tube insertion is indicated for cases with poor response to parenteral antibiotic therapy. Presence of an abscess or intracranial complication or acute mastoiditis in chronic ear. Other complications include labyrinthine fistula or facial nerve paralysis. Labyrinthine fistula, in which cholestoma has eroded into the inner ear, present with vertigo and sensorineural hearing loss. Facial nerve paralysis secondary to otitis media is treated with appropriate antibiotic and tympanostomy tube insertion. If facial nerve paralysis is secondary to cholestoma, mastoidectomy is indicated. So now look at the table. Complications of otitis media: intracranial complication and extracranial complication. In intracranial complication, we have meningitis, epidural abscess, dural venous thrombosis, brain abscess, otitic hydrocephalus, subdural abscess. So by this we can get a mnemonic. For this mnemonic is this is the mnemonic for intracranial complication. What are the intracranial complication? Dural venous thrombosis, epidural abscess, meningitis, otitic hydrocephalus, brain abscess, subdural abscess. For extracranial complication, acute gallstone mastoiditis, subperiosteal abscess, facial nerve paralysis, labyrinthitis or labyrinthine fistula. So now come to the Another disease, otitis externa. Acute otitis externa, swimmer's ear, also known by the name of swimmer's ear, present with itching, painfulness, erythema and edema of the ear canal, and tenderness on moving the pinna on tragus or tragus are diagnostic feature. Otorrhea is common risk factor including swimming, impacted cerumen, hearing aid use, eczema, trauma of foreign body object, hairpin or cotton. The etiological agent of otitis externa is Pseudomonas aeruginosa, most important. Staphylococcus, Proteus, E. coli, Aspergillus, and Candida species. Treatment consists of ear canal culture, cleaning, and topical antibiotic drop. Topical antibiotic have clinical cure rate up to 80%. If edema is significant, ribbon gauze or a wick may be placed in the external auditory canal to stent it open for drop delivery. Oral antibiotics are reserved for failure to improve and complication. Otomycosis of fungal otitis externa is most common in humid weather or present with pain and pruritus. These opportunistic infections are frequently seen subsequent to treatment of a bacterial infection. Examination reveals fungal spores and filaments. Aspergillus and Candida are most common pathogens. Oral toilet and topical antifungal are curative. Otic furunculosis is an excruciatingly painful superficial abscess in the outer portion of the ear canal, typically from Staph aureus. Oral anti-staphylococcal antibiotic and analgesic about prompt relief, incision and drainage may be necessary. Eczematous and psoriatic otitis arthritis describe a group of inflammatory condition in which there is a drainage, pruritus, or scaling of the ear canal skin. Underlying causes include dermatitis, atopic dermatitis, seborrheic dermatitis. Malignant otitis externa is rare invasive infection of the external auditory canal cartilage and bone. Immunocompromised children are at risk. Pseudomonas aeruginosa is most common etiology. Invasive fungal species, especially Aspergillus, are also seen. External auditory canal is tender and facial or scalp necessary may arise with or without cranial nerve abnormality. Diagnosis is confirmed with CT or MRI scan and scintigraphy for osteomyelitis of the temporal bone. Aggressive surgical debridement, a parenteral antibiotic and antifungal for 4 to 6 weeks are required. Treatment response may be monitored with a serial gallium bone scan. Hearing loss. Early detection of hearing loss in children is imperative, and recognize an early hearing loss can impair development of speech, language, and cognitive skill. Separate differential diagnosis exists for deficit of both the conductive and sensorineural component of the hearing mechanism. Hearing loss in children can be classified as either congenital or acquired. Conductive hearing loss. Any process that interferes with the conductive mechanism of the ear canal, tympanic membrane, or ossicles may cause a conductive hearing loss. The most common pediatric cause of conductive loss is otitis media with effusion and is typically of mild to moderate severity. Several congenital syndromes may also be associated with the middle ear abnormality such as Apert, Cruzen, and Treacher-Collins syndrome. For this, we can make a mnemonic: cat syndrome. Cat are associated with. Okay. Cat syndrome. Apert Cruzen and Treacher Collins syndrome. Sensory neural hearing loss. Sensory neural hearing loss is caused by lesion of the cochlea, auditory nerve, and central auditory pathway. SNHL can be acquired or congenital, both being equally common. Most common postnatal cause of acquired sensory neural hearing loss is meningitis, while most common prenatal intrauterine infection is intrauterine infection. Other causes acquired hearing loss include prematurity, hyperbilirubinemia, perinatal hypoxia, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, heart trauma, and ototoxic medication, amino glycoside or loop diuretics. Congenital cause of sensory neural hearing loss are syndromic, non-syndromic type. Also, 70% of congenital hearing loss is non-syndromic. Over 300 genetic syndromes are associated with SNHL. Common syndrome include Pendred syndrome, Jervell-Lange-Nielsen syndrome, Usher syndrome, Alpert syndrome, bronchio-otorhinal syndrome, neurofibromatosis, Waardenburg syndrome, multiple chromosome loci, and at least 65 genes associated with the genetic hearing loss have been identified. Mutation in a single gene, GJB2, may be responsible for up to 50% of non-syndromic congenital hearing loss. GJB2 encodes the protein connexin 16 to 26, connexin 26, which is widely expressed in cells of the inner ear. Screening tests for this mutation are available. Neonatal screening. All neonates with risk factor for hearing loss should be screened with an autoacoustic emission test or an auditory brainstem response. The use of clinical indicator to focus hearing screens will miss any as 50% of all cases of impairment. Hence, universal newborn hearing screen programs are now commonplace in the United States and Europe. The importance of neonatal screening cannot be overemphasized. Infant in whom treatment for hearing loss is initiated by 6 months of age are unable to maintain language and social development in line with their physical development. This is in contrast to those whose hearing loss is identified after 6 months of age. A limitation of newborn screening is that some form of early onset hearing loss are not apparent at birth. A United States Joint Committee on Infant Hearing has identified 11 risk indicators that should prompt continued monitoring of hearing status, even in the face of normal neonatal screening in older children. Clinical evaluation of hearing at routine child assessment is critical for early detection of hearing impairment. Examination should include otoscopy with attention to middle ear pathology. Doubtful cases are referred for detailed audiologic evaluation so that timely intervention may begin. Multiple techniques exist to assess hearing sensitivity and are selected based on the age and the ability of the child. For younger children unable to understand instructions, visual reinforcement audiometry is performed. Pure tone audiometry is possible in children older than 5 years. Tympanometry may be performed in nearly all children to assess eardrum mobility. Indication for continued hearing monitoring in children with normal hearing on neonatal screening. Caregiver concern regarding hearing, speech, or developmental delay. Family history of childhood hearing loss. Neonatal intensive care for more than 5 days or use of any of the following regardless of duration: extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, assisted ventilation, exposure to ototoxic antibiotic or loop diuretic, and hyperbilirubinemia require exchange transfusion. In utero infection, finding of a syndrome associated with hearing loss. Postnatal infection known to cause hearing loss. Syndrome associated with progressive hearing loss. Neurodegenerative disorder. Head trauma, recurrent or persistent otitis media with effusion, chemotherapy or head radiation. Treatment of hearing loss. Once diagnosed, treatment of hearing loss is based on the extent of deficit and the underlying pathology. For very mild pathology, hearing loss, treatment may consist simply of preferential seating in school. For mild moderate conductive hearing loss, treatment options include tympanostomy, If perforation is present, tympanoplasty. Mild to moderate conductive hearing loss, tympanostomy. Perforation present, tympanoplasty. Okay. Very mild pathology, hearing loss. Treatment of significant sensorineural hearing loss may require the use of hearing aid from the early 3 months of age. This is for significant sensorineural hearing loss. The development of cochlear implant has rapidly reshaped the management of childhood hearing loss. Bilateral cochlear implantation may be considered for the infant as young as 12 months of age who have found profound bilaterally hearing loss and have may be considered even earlier if the hearing loss is due to meningitis. If a child has never had auditory stimulus, cochlear implantation before 6 years of age is crucial to develop the auditory cortex for sound awareness and speech development. Sign language and deaf education programs should be considered for children who are not candidates of cochlear implantation. Disease of the nose and sinuses, rhinitis, allergic rhinitis. Allergic rhinitis is an inflammatory disorder characterized by sneezing, itching, nasal obstruction, and clear rhinorrhea. The pathophysiology involves an IgE-mediated reaction to a specific allergen. Symptoms may be seasonal hay fever or perineal. Examination reveals a pale nasal mucosa, congested nasal turbinate, and mucoid rhinorrhea. Conjunctival itching and redness may be present. Inhaled allergens are common cause. Accurate diagnosis may require demonstration of eosinophilia in a nasal smear or the use of skin serologic tests to show specific IgE response to allergen. These tests establish the atopic etiology and how to differentiate from the other conditions with similar symptoms. Treatment include allergen avoidance, use of topical nasal steroid spray for prevention, and oral histamines for symptom relief. The use of oral decongestant is controversial. The topical decongestant should also generally be discouraged as they cause rebound congestion, and chemical rhinitis and rhinitis medicamentosa. Viral rhinitis. Viral rhinitis is common cold is the most common cause of both nasal obstruction and rhinorrhea in children. Children normally average between 6 and 8 of these upper respiratory tract infections per year. Malaise, low to moderate grade fever, nasal congestion, and rhinorrhea are the presenting symptoms. A number of different viruses can be responsible, including rhinovirus, influenza, adenovirus. Treatment is symptomatic and involves antipyretic, saline nasal spray, use of oral decongestant, and antihistamine are controversial. A number of developed countries recommend annual influenza vaccination in children older than 6 months. Otitis media and sinusitis are frequent complications. Sinusitis can be classified as either acute or chronic. The ethmoid and maxillary sinuses are the earliest to develop and are the one most commonly infected in pediatric sinusitis. The frontal sinuses may become involved only after 5 to 6 years of life. Isolated sphenoid disease is rare. Risk factors associated with sinusitis include recurrent upper respiratory infection, allergic rhinitis, cystic fibrosis, immunodeficiency, ciliary dyskinesia, daycare attendance, and exposure to tobacco smoke. 10-15% of upper respiratory tract infection are complicated by sinusitis. A sinus infection should be considered in any child whose cold symptoms have not resolved by 7 to 10 days. Etiology. Most common isolate in acute sinus infections are Streptococcus pneumoniae, Haemophilus influenza, and Catarrhalis. The same bacteria are implicated in chronic sinusitis as are Staphylococcus aureus, anaerobe, and occasional fungi. The adenoid pad play an important role in the pathophysiology of pediatric sinusitis, since it may serve as a bacterial reservoir for the parental sinuses. Diagnosis: acute rhinosinusitis typically present as an episode of upper respiratory tract infection with worsening of nasal discharge and cough 7 to 10 days after the onset of symptoms. A severe URI with fever more than 38.5 degrees Celsius and purulent rhinorrhea also meets the diagnostic criteria for acute sinusitis. Chronic sinusitis is defined as a symptom of sinusitis lasting longer than 30 days. Nasal obstruction, malaise and headache may all be feature of chronic sinusitis. Imaging is not necessary and should be reserved for cases with complication and those being considered for surgery. CT scan is superior to plain X-ray for imaging of paranasal sinuses. Allergic fungal sinusitis is an increasingly recognized condition in atopic incompetent patients. Older children and adolescents are most commonly affected. The cause is hypersensitivity to fungal antigen. This results in the form of chronic rhinosinusitis that requires surgical intervention. Complications that include orbital and intracranial spread of infection. Orbital complications most commonly result from direct extension from the ethmoid. Early orbital complications manifest as periorbital cellulitis. More severe complications include orbital abscess or cavernous sinus thrombosis, ophthalmoplegia, vision loss, and toxemia indicate life-threatening infection of the cavernous sinus. Intracranial complications may also occur or more commonly associated with the frontal and sphenoid sinus infection. Treatment: although the significant number of acute sinusitis episodes will resolve spontaneously, treatment with antibiotic is preferred. Therapy with amoxicillin is recommended for 10 to 14 days. Longer course and second-line antibiotic agents are indicated for refractory infection. Parenteral antibiotics are necessary for sinusitis with orbital and intracranial complications. Other adjuvant measures include oral decongestant, mucolytic agent, and topical nasal saline. Topical decongestant may be used in sinusitis with complications. Antihistamines are avoided due to the drying effect. Antibiotics are also required for chronic sinusitis as most of these patients have already failed a course of standard dose amoxicillin. Initial therapy consists of co-amoxiclav, high-dose amoxicillin, and cefuroxime. The duration of treatment is longer than for acute sinusitis, typically 3 to 6 weeks. Patients with penicillin allergy may be treated with macrolide antibiotic. Although there is increasing resistance of pathogen to the agent, topical nasal steroids are occasionally useful for treatment. Surgical intervention for acute sinusitis is limited to those with orbital and intracranial complications. Surgery may be considered for patients with chronic sinusitis who have not respond to aggressive medical management or who show anatomical obstruction. After maximal medical management and extensive medical workup with allergy testing and immune evaluation, adenoidectomy to remove a potential bacterial reservoir for the sinuses must be considered in younger children. The indication for endoscopic sinus surgery include patients with sinonasal polyposis, cystic fibrosis, failure to improve despite 1 month course of medical therapy, and any orbital and cranial complication. Nasal obstruction causes chronic mouth breathing in children is generally caused by blockage of nasal airflow. The site of nasal blockage is most often the nasopharyngeal area due to the adenoid hypertrophy. Intranasal cause of obstruction include allergic rhinitis, recurrent sinusitis, nasal septum deviation, turbinate hypertrophy, nasal polyp, and less commonly neoplasm. As a rule, bilateral nasal polyps do not occur in normal children as their presence should prompt testing for cystic fibrosis. Congenital cause of nasal airway obstruction include choanal stenosis or atresia, Drummond's teratoma, encephalocele, and piriform aperture, bony opening to the nasal cavity in the skull stenosis. Diagnosis: adenoid enlargement should be suspected in children, usually older than 2 years, who present with nasal block, mouth breathing, sleep disturbance, chronic nasal discharge. Examination must rule out nasal pathology such as septal deviation or polyposis. Neonate with piriform aperture stenosis may present with a single midline maxillary incisor. A CT scan X-ray confirm the diagnosis. Treatment: adenoidectomy is the recommended for symptomatic younger children. Pubertal growth of the midface and regression of adenoid size tend to result in relief of adenoid-related nasal obstruction in children older than 9 years. Piriform aperture stenosis is treated with surgical drilling of the obstructing bony plate. Treatment for sinonasal polyposis include topical and systemic steroid for limited disease and surgical intervention for larger obstructing polyps. Surgery on the nasal septum should be avoided in prepubertal children as it may lead to retardation in midface growth and saddling of the nasal dorsum. Conservative operation to correct the limited portion of the septum may be justified in a particular symptomatic children. Definite hypertrophy usually responds to treatment of allergy through electrocautery may be used in refractory cases. Epistaxis, bleeding from the nose, occur frequently in children. Most pediatric epistaxis occur in the anterior portion. At a confluence of arterial vessel known as Little's area. Local trauma, especially nose picking, is by far the most common cause of pediatric epistaxis. Reduced ambient humidity also places the patient at a risk. Examination reveals prominent vessels in the Little's area that bleed promptly when touched with a cotton-tipped probe. Digital pressure by pinching the nose invariably stops the bleeding. Avoidance of nose picking, application of an antibiotic ointment, full and lubricant, and refractive cases, cauterization with topical silver nitrate or electrocautery are curative. Bleeding disorder must be suspected in children with suggestive family history, a history of frequent bleeding from other side, or any nasal bleeding which does not respond in the usual fashion. Less frequent cause of recurrent epistaxis include juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma, hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia. The former is a benign vascular tumor occurring exclusively in adults and males that can cause profuse brisk bleeding. Hereditary telangiectasia, also known as Osler-Weber-Rendu syndrome, is a genetic defect in blood vessel structure resulting in arteriovenous malformation. Patient may suffer from severe recurrent epistaxis as well as gastrointestinal bleed, pulmonary hemorrhage. Choanal atresia. Choanal atresia is the congenital failure of the nasal cavity to open into the nasopharynx. Is the choanal atresia. It results from failed resorption of buccopharyngeal membrane, either unilaterally, bilaterally, or even partially with a severe stenosis. As neonates are obligate nasal breather, 4-6 months of bilateral choanal atresia present immediately after birth with respiratory distress. The affected baby cycle between silent cyanosis and crying. Suckling immediately precipitates cyanosis. Bilateral atresia can present as a part of charge association, consisting of coloboma, heart abnormality, choanal atresia, retardation of growth and development, genitourinary defect, and ear abnormality. Unilateral choanal atresia is a more indolent process and may present later in childhood with unilateral nasal discharge or blockage. Atresia typically manifests when the opposite nasal bases become blocked due to rhinitis or adenoid hypertrophy. Diagnosis: inability to pass an 8 French catheter can aid in the diagnosis. Flexible nasal endoscopy confirms the diagnosis. CT scan can demonstrate the atretic plate thickness and differentiate between bony and membranous atresia. Treatment: bilateral choanal atresia require urgent management by inserting a finger in the baby's mouth and pressing the tongue down and forward away from the back of the throat. This should be placed with a plastic oropharyngeal airway or a McGovern open tip nipple. Failure of these measures may necessitate intubation or tracheostomy. Treatment of choanal atresia is surgical. The two primary approaches are transpalatal and transnasal. Transnasal endoscopic repair is often attempted first as it is less invasive. Transpalatal repair, which involves removal of the posterior hard palate, is often reserved for failed endoscopic repair. Stents are placed in the nasal passage to prevent restenosis and are typically left in place for 3 to 6 weeks postoperatively. Disease of the oral cavity and pharynx, inflammatory disorder, recurrent aphthous stomatitis, hepatic stomatitis, oral candidiasis. Three disorders: recurrent aphthous stomatitis, hepatic stomatitis, oral candidiasis. Recurrent aphthous stomatitis, common pediatric disorder that are present as painful with white ulcer of variable size on the oral mucosa. The exact etiology is unknown. Idiopathic means idiopathic. The ulcer resolves spontaneously over several days. If symptomatic management does not suffice, topical steroid and rarely systemic steroid are employed but may require intravenous fluid for dehydration. Herpetic stomatitis present in children with a small painful vesicle that evolves into great pseudomembranous mucosal ulcer. Antiviral medication may be used to hasten recovery through the lesion usually heals spontaneously within 10 to 14 days. Once again, intravenous fluid may be required. Oral candidiasis thrush appear as small white curd-like lesion on the tongue and oral mucosa. In children under age 6 months or those on antibiotic, it is benign finding. It can also be related to systemic disease such as diabetes or immunodeficiency. Oral antifungal are effective. Congenital disorder: ankyloglossia, cleft palate, macroglossia, lingual thyroid. Ankyloglossia, tongue tie, is a limitation of anterior tongue mobility caused by congenitally short lingual frenulum. This condition is not related to speech impairment. Cleft palate may appear with or without cleft lip and can cause serious feeding difficulty. The etiology is multifactorial. Treatment should include staged reconstruction of the lip and palate defect and multidisciplinary management. Micrognathium, small mandible if severe, may displace the tongue posteriorly and cause respiratory distress in the neonate. Congenital micrognathia is most commonly seen in the Pierre-Robin sequence, in which patients also have cleft palate and glossotosis. If the micrognathia is severe, the neonate may require tracheostomy to secure the airway. Macroglossia may be idiopathic or associated with syndrome such as Down syndrome, Beck-Widman syndrome, neurofibromatosis. Here, one mnemonic we can add: Down syndrome, neurofibromatosis, and Beck-Widman syndrome. If significant, the enlarged tongue may cause drooling, speech impairment, and airway obstruction. Lingual thyroid may present posterior midline tongue mass and is caused by an abnormal descent of the thyroid from the tongue base in utero. It may present with a neonatal respiratory distress and may be associated with the thyroglossal duct cyst. As lingual thyroid often represents the only functioning thyroid tissue, its removal may necessitate chronic thyroid function supplementation. Sore throat. Viral pharyngitis. Infectious mononucleosis, acute bacterial pharyngotonsillitis, and pharyngeal injury. Sore throat. Viral pharyngitis is very common and caused by the number of different pathogens including adenovirus, enterovirus, coccipi virus, influenza virus. It is typically present with non-exudative pharyngeal erythema and tender cervical adenopathy. Upper respiratory complaints, rhinorrhea, nasal obstruction, cough, fever are common. Treatment is supportive as this is nearly always self-limited. Infectious mononucleosis caused by the Epstein-Barr virus present with sore throat, gray pharyngeal exudate, and soft palate edema. Patients show significant cervical lymphadenopathy and hepatosplenomegaly. Monospot or pulmonal tests are useful in a screening test. Antibody titer come from the diagnosis. Medical treatment is supportive and may include steroid for respiratory difficulty or severe dysphagia. Acute bacterial pharyngotonsillitis is caused by group A beta hemolytic streptococci. Less common pathogens include non-group A streptococcus aureus, Haemophilus influenza, Moraxella catarrhalis, diphtheria, gonococcus, chlamydia, mycoplasma. Streptococcal pharyngitis present as a bilateral tonsillitis, hypertrophy, and erythema with characteristic exudate. To distinguish between viral and bacterial pharyngotonsillitis, a rapid stress test should be obtained. A negative result should be confirmed by throat culture. Treatment is with 10-day course of penicillin or a first-generation cephalosporin. Both supportive and non-supportive complications can result from incompletely treated streptococcal pharyngitis. Non-supportive complications include scarlet fever, acute traumatic fever, post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. Supportive complications include peritonsillar, parapharyngeal, and retropharyngeal abscess. Peritonsillar abscess typically present with muffled voice, trismus, and decreased oral intake. Physical examination reveal unilateral displacement of affected tonsil toward the midline with a bulge in the peritonsillar region and vulvar deviation to the opposite side. CT scan may aid diagnosis. Treatment consists of incision and drainage by experienced personnel. This should be followed by 7 to 10-day course of oral or parenteral penicillin or clindamycin. Steroid to reduce pain, fever may be considered as adjuvant therapy. Immediate tonsillectomy, Quincy tonsillectomy may be performed but has increased hemorrhage risk. A single peritonsillar abscess is a relative indication for tonsillectomy. Patients with recurrent abscess should always be considered for tonsil removal. Pharyngeal injury may occur in children after falling with a pain stick or other sharp object in the mouth. Examination reveal a puncture or laceration of the soft palate, tonsil, and pharyngeal wall. The most significant risk is a carotid injury. The presence of significant bleeding, neurological finding, a puncture lateral to the exposed tonsil should prompt immediate consultation and evaluation with angiography. Adenotonsillectomy, removal of the tonsil and adeno, is the most commonly performed pediatric operation. Recurrent tonsillectomy is the common indication. More than 5 to 6 episodes of tonsillitis in a year or significant missed time for school or work should prompt consider for tonsillectomy. Other indications include obstructive sleep apnea, suspicion of malignancy, previous tonsillar peritonsillar abscess. Surgery is performed on an outpatient basis in older children. The most significant risk of tonsillectomy is postoperative hemorrhage. Obstructive sleep apnea. Obstructive sleep apnea is characterized by episodic obstruction of airflow through the upper airway during sleep. Adenotonsillar hypertrophy is the most common cause of pediatric obstructive sleep apnea. Congenital nasal masses may be responsible for neonatal obstructive sleep apnea. Physiologic sequelae may include hypoxemia, hypercapnia, acidosis. The most severely affected patient may develop failure to thrive, right ventricular failure, pulmonary hypertension, core pulmonary. Patients with OSA present with noisy breathing, specifically stuttered. Other symptoms include snoring, breath holding, or gasping during sleep, as well as enuresis. Daytime manifestations include morning headache, halitosis, behavioral disorder. Physical examination often reveal audible breathing with open mouth posture, hyponasal speech, tonsillar hyperplasia. Polysomnography remains the gold standard for the diagnosis. Adenotonsillectomy is considered first-line therapy for pediatric obstructive sleep apnea. If the apnea-hypopnea index is greater than 10, then child should monitor closely in the postoperative period with pulse oximetry. Surgical removal of nasal mask may require in the most severe cases of OSA. Tracheostomy may be considered. Disease of the larynx and trachea. Stridor. The term stridor refers to excessively noisy musical breathing. Generally due to upper airway obstruction. The relationship of stridor to the respiratory cycle often provides a clue to its etiology. Inspiratory stridor suggests the obstruction above the vocal cord, supraglottis, while the expiratory stridor usually originates from the distal trachea. Biphasic stridor usually originates from the subglottic or proximal tracheal lesion. Most pediatric stridor originates from supraglottic lesion. Evaluation of a stridor child should include a thorough history. Physical findings include nasal flaring and suprasternal and intercostal refraction. Chest X-ray and or lateral neck film may confirm diagnosis, such as retropharyngeal abscess, epiglottis group. Barium esophagus CT scan may rule out the extrinsic vascular compression. Flexible and rigid endoscopy is generally needed to confirm the diagnosis. There are multiple causes of pediatric airway obstruction, some of which are listed below. Infection group. Laryngotracheobronchitis is a viral upper respiratory tract infection often present in children 1 to 5 years of age with 5 basic stridor, barking, bark, cough, low-grade fever. Onset of symptom is usually over several days. Chest X-ray reveals a characteristic narrowing of the subglottic region known as steeple sign. Most cases of group are mild and resolve within 1 to 2 days. Conservative management should include reassurance, cool mist, and oral hydration. Children with stridor at rest should be hospitalized for close observation. Cool mist and supplemental oxygen therapy with epinephrine cubes through the nebulizer help in relief of symptoms. A single dose of dexamethasone reduces overall severity during first 24 hours. Recently, inhalation of budesonide in a dose of 1 mg twice a day for 2 days as shown in satisfactory results. Antibiotics are indicated only if the child fails to improve if purulent secretions are present. Coverage should be directed toward staphylococcal and H. influenza. Acute epiglottitis, often called supraglottitis, although less common than group, typically present with a greater degree of airway compromise. Patient typically present with acute onset of sore throat, marked dysphagia, high fever. Patients are often encountered leaning forward to tripod position, toxic appearance, and drooling. Unlike group, cough is frequently absent. Lateral neck X-ray reveals a characteristic thickening of epiglottitis thumbprint sign. Or other supraglottic structure. Haemophilus influenza type B is the major etiological organism. If epiglottitis is suspected, rapid airway management is essential and includes intubation by skilled personnel. Instrumentation of the throat with a tongue depressor is not advised as this can precipitate a fatal laryngospasm. Management includes securing the airway and broad spectrum IV antibiotic. Example coamoxiclav, ceftriaxone, or cefuroxime. The incidence of epiglottis has declined since the use of vaccine has H influenza. Against H influenza, bacterial tracheitis is typically seen in younger children following viral upper respiratory tract infection. Child appears toxic with bradycardia stridor. Patient have classic irregular tracheal wall on X-ray. Bronchoscopy is the both diagnostic and therapeutic, as the purulent tracheal secretion can be visualized, cultured, and mechanically interpreted. The bacterial tracheitis is a relative medical emergency, as life-threatening obstruction may develop from these tracheal secretion. The responsible pathogen is usually Staph aureus. Retropharyngeal abscess is a potential suppurative complication of the bacterial pharyngitis. Patients often have high fever, reduced mobility of the neck, and appear toxic. Complications of retropharyngeal abscess include spread of infection into the mediastinum. Mediastinitis is potential fatal. Lateral neck radiograph reveals a bulge in the posterior pharyngeal wall. Treatment is by surgical drainage and broad-spectrum parenteral antibiotic. Congenital causes: laryngomalacia, vocal paralysis, vocal cord paralysis, congenital subglottic stenosis, vascular ring, subglottic hemangioma, congenital saccular cyst, laryngeal pap. These are the congenital causes. Iatrogenic causes: neoplasm, foreign body aspiration. Laryngomalacia, most common congenital laryngeal anomaly, accounting for up to 60% of the most common cause of infant stridor. Inspiratory stridor is the hallmark of the condition. Symptoms are typically aggravated when the child is supine on crying. Flexible endoscopy reveals partial collapse of flaccid supraglottic airway with inspiration. If the presents gastroesophageal reflux should be managed. Laryngomalacia is generally benign and self-limited, as most cases resolve by 18 months of age. Surgical intervention is advised for either respiratory distress or failure to thrive. Vocal cord paralysis is the second most common congenital laryngeal anomaly. Bilateral vocal cord paralysis usually present with high-pitched inspiratory stridor and cyanosis. It is usually iatrogenic by excessive stretch of the neck during vaginal delivery, producing an palsy of recurrent nerve, but can also be idiopathic. Other causes may include Arnold-Chiari malformation, hydrocephalus, or hypoxia. Unilateral vocal cord paralysis, in contrast, may present with mild stridor or with sign of aspiration. Iatrogenic injury during ligation of patient ductus arteriosus is frequent cause. Tracheostomy is required to secure the airway in bilateral paralysis, generally not in unilateral paralysis unless there is excessive aspiration. Congenital subglottic stenosis, third most common cause. Congenital laryngeal anomaly. It results from incomplete recanalization of the laryngotracheal tube during embryonic development. Subglottic stenosis may present as a recurrent episode of stridor and may be mislabeled as croup. Many cases resolve spontaneously as the child grows, while severe cases usually require tracheostomy. Surgical excision of the stenosis may be necessary to relieve the obstruction in these cases. Vascular ring is great vessels anomaly that causes extrinsic compression of both the trachea and esophagus. The child with vascular ring anomaly usually presents with dysphagia as well as stridor. Contrast swelling study esophagogram OCT may reveal the diagnosis. Treatment for vascular anomaly is surgical. Subglottic hemangioma is a benign vascular tumor that may present in the trachea and infant usually become symptomatic between 3 to 6 months of life. Symptoms include basic stridor and a barking cough. Up to 50% may have concurrent cutaneous head and neck hemangioma. Imaging may reveal asymmetric subglottic narrowing. The diagnosis is confirmed with endoscopy. Treatment options include primarily oral propranolol, intralesional steroid, CO2 laser excision, tracheostomy, and open surgical excision. Congenital sacral cyst and laryngeal web and laryngeal atresia are rare laryngeal anomalies. They present with airway obstruction and require surgical intervention. Iatrogenic causes: acquired subglottic stenosis, laryngeal granuloma. Acquired subglottic stenosis, most common cause of acquired stridor. It often results from long-term endotracheal intubation and subsequent scar formation. Minor stenosis may be observed, while more severe stenosis may be treated by a variety of surgical methods, including tracheostomy, widening of the stenosis with cartilage graft, excision of the stenotic segment. Laryngeal granuloma may also result from prolonged intubation. Endoscopy reveals a focal cord granuloma. These are often amenable to endoscopic removal. Neoplasm, recurrent respiratory papilloma, most common benign laryngeal tumor and present with gradual airway obstruction. Endoscopy reveals a single or multiple irregular wart-like masses in the larynx and pharynx. The condition is caused by human papilloma virus. HPV type 6 to 11 are the most common. Transmission is believed to be vertical from the passage of the fetus through an infected birth canal. Treatment is with CO2 laser ablation or microtephriter excision of the papilloma. Adjunctive therapy include intralesional citrofovir and alpha interferon. Multiple surgical procedures are usually necessary as the disease typically recurs. Foreign body aspiration should always be considered as a potential cause of stridor and airway obstruction in children. Foreign body most commonly aspirated are food coin. Conforming objects such as balloon pose as greater risk of choking death, followed by round objects such as balls, marbles. After establishing airway patency, urgent endoscopy, visualization, and removal by an experienced surgeon are necessary. Hoarseness. Vocal nodules are the most common cause of hoarseness in children and generally caused by vocal abuse. They are seen more frequently in habitually shouting or screaming children, usually boys with siblings. The severity of hoarseness fluctuates, worsening with vocal abuse and improving with rest. Endoscopy reveals a small bilateral opposing nodule at junction of anterior and middle third of the vocal cord. Speech therapy is usually effective in older children and surgery is rarely indicated. Reflux laryngitis may result from gastric secretion spilling onto the larynx. Reflux has been implicated into the numerous diseases of the head and neck, ranging from laryngitis and subglottic stenosis to chronic sinusitis and otitis media with effusion. Diagnosis is best established with 24-hour pH monitoring. Medical management is usually effective through surgical fundoplication may be needed in severe cases. Hypothalamic edema may occasionally cause an increase in vocal fold edema and present with as hoarseness and stridor. Thyroid function tests should be conducted in the host child. Thyroid function tests should also be conducted in the host child with clinical history of suggestive hypothyroid. Laryngotracheal cleft is a rare congenital defect in the posterior cartilage of the larynx. In the mildest form, children with this process may experience feeding difficulty, recurrent respiratory tract, or hoarseness. In its more severe form, the cleft may extend inferiorly between the entire trachea and esophagus. Severe cleft usually cause significant aspiration pneumonias and are often not compatible with life. The condition may be associated with hereditary conditions such as optic Fries and Pallister Hall syndrome. Management of symptomatic cleft is surgical. Diseases of the salivary gland: infection, bacterial parotiditis, cyanodenatitis, viral parotitis, tuberculosis, human immunodeficiency virus. Drooling infections: bacterial parotiditis, cyanodenatitis is frequent in small children and present with painful unilateral parotid swelling. Purulent material may be expressed from the parotid duct intraorally with parotid massage. Dehydration leads to staphylococcal overgrowth in the duct system. Treatment includes oral antibiotic as well as hydration, salivary massage, and warm compresses. Viral parotitis is the cause most often by the mumps virus. Patients generally present with a painful parotid enlargement and fever. They may also present with an acute unilateral hearing loss or vestibular weakness. Systemic manifestations such as meningoencephalitis, pancreatitis, and orchitis may also be present. Tuberculosis: most common granulomatous inflammation of the parotid. It may be limited to the salivary gland without lung involvement. Sarcoidosis may also present with unilateral bilateral parotid swelling. It is usually seen with systemic symptoms and peripheral adenopathy. A variety of laboratory tests and radiological studies, including chest radiographs, support the diagnosis. Stored are of value in treating xerostomia. Human immunodeficiency virus: involvement of the parotid gland is common, presenting as a bilateral intraglandular cyst. The cysts invariably recur after aspiration. Drooling: drooling is a common self-limiting limited finding in children. However, in children with neuromuscular disorder, dysphagia, and poor lip closure may result in chronic drooling. If the swelling mechanism is also abnormal, pooled secretion may also chronic aspiration, leading to pneumonia or other complications. Medical therapy for drooling, not controlled with speech therapy, consists of trying agents such as glycopyrrolate and antihistamines. Refractory cases of sialorrhea may be treated surgically with salivary gland excision, ductal ligation, or rerouting, destruction of parasympathetic fiber, or some combination of the above. At present, the preferred surgical treatment is bilateral submandibular gland excision with parotid ductal ligation. Tracheostomy or separation of trachea from the upper airway is reserved for profound and life-threatening chronic aspiration. So we finished the topic. So now I'm signing out from the otolaryngology. Thank you.